Thank you so much, all you hardy souls that braved the weather to come out tonight. It's a welcome from Next Chapter and Wayzata Community Church, and we're thrilled that you're here. Clint, I want to introduce you after you finished, which I was waiting for all the people to be here. So I know you enjoyed the wonderful music of Clint Clark, an Emmy Award-winning composer and obviously gifted pianist. A longtime member of the church, so this is his church home. And I want to say one other thing. He's talented enough that he's played with Chuck Berry, Dennis Coffey, and a whole bunch of other, leading musicians and soloists. So I also want to invite his next chapter is Clint has started a thing called pianonanny.com. It's a website that teaches people and encourages people to play the piano. It's free, so any of you piano wannabes, check it out. So that'd be good. Well, let me give you a little background, so thanks again, Clint. That was wonderful. It was really extremely hard to get Clint to come. I asked Autumn if we could have some live music, and I think it took her over 15 minutes to get Clint lined up. So, that was wonderful. So let me give you a little background on what we're going to do tonight. Next chapter, for those that are maybe here for the first time, it's really all about helping people transition to a next stage of life. And there are a lot of transitions in life from, losing a job, an unplanned job loss of a significant other, going into retirement, and quite a few more, divorce and a lot of other things that cause us to move to the next chapter. And we want to provide the resources for that. So every month we'll have a speaker, and we have discussion group. I think Leslie will tell you more about the one that she's going to lead for the next 2 weeks after this. And we're trying to form support groups too. And I know a number of you have taken the survey that's on our webpage, and we appreciate that because that tells us what you want. Because this is really all about what people really want to have. And so we want to know your feedback. So that's that. We have a resource library in the library and online. What you got, the handout you got tonight gives you the QR code to go. I've heard from some people it's kind of hard to find our webpage on our website. So you've got 2 QR codes on the sheet that you were given coming in. One will take you to the webpage, and the other will take you to our recorded presentations from all of our speakers up to date. And Leslie's will be on there probably tomorrow. So you've got that. So first, I got a lot of people to thank. The staff at the church has done a magnificent job in supporting this program. We've got Steve Weens, who's on our pastoral staff. He's our staff liaison. We've got Autumn, who plays all kinds of roles. Marnie Bear, who does all the creative. So she's managing our website, all the handouts you get, she's designed. And so she's an incredible resource. Joel Bauer, who's manning the AV, he'll be handling the taping of the presentation tonight. And last but not least, or maybe last but least, is John Estrom. So John and his team have created all of the facility things that we need, getting easels and tables and all of that. And the one thing that John used to do that, he didn't come through with tonight is he proposes that he can control the weather. So he's been doing the summer outdoor services now for 11 years. And I would suspect that we've maybe had to move inside 2 or 3 times in 11 years. And there are a lot of days when you look out the window and it's, totally black skies at 2 o'clock and you go, boy, this isn't going to happen. And miraculously, John takes credit for it, by 4 or 5 o'clock it's sunny and clear and we can do our service outdoors. So not sure how he kind of failed today, but hopefully for the next chapter we'll be back on track. And again, thanks so much for coming. Now let me introduce our guest of the evening. So, a lot of you know, maybe most of you know Leslie. She's been a big part of our community for quite some time. And I would view her as a true next chapter creative innovator. And I don't think there's any other way to speak to it. You know, Leslie was a person that saw a need, and rather than just wish there was a solution, she jumped in and created a solution. So she started the special needs program here called Parables. I know a lot of you are aware of that, and maybe a number of you attend that. And that has turned into a community-wide. We draw people and families, kids and families from all over the Twin Cities. And not to rest on her laurels, Leslie is now taking that message and that program nationally. So she is reaching out to churches and communities around the country to encourage them to do the same kind of thing. So a great legacy for Leslie, and she's truly making a difference for people that really need that. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Leslie.
Just Beyond Yourself, written and read by David White.
I see so many familiar faces and then new ones, and I'm just blessed to be with you tonight. So, will you pray with me? Gracious God, we come on this stormy night, this windy night where the winds are a-blowing, and the winds are a-blowing in many of our lives. And so we come listening. We come listening for your movement, for your spirit, for your call into our next chapter, our next steps. Still us. Help us to really be present and to listen for your still small voice, which is always there if we just quiet enough to hear it. We ask this in your sweet Son's name. Amen. So my first question for you, most important question of the evening, is when do I need to stop? Till when? Till midnight. Okay. So I should have mentioned that. Usually, about an hour and maybe a little change. Okay. My husband had me do some cheat sheets because he said I can get kind of crazy on this topic. So, so reel me in, Jim, if I need reeling. I'm going to go ahead and ask. I'm going to have you listen to a piece of poetry before we get started. So.
Just Beyond Yourself, written and read by David White.
Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting and the rest restored by what you'll meet. Yeah. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting and the rest restored by what you'll meet. There's a road always beckoning. There's a road always beckoning. When you see the two sides of it closing together at that far horizon and deep in the foundations of your own heart at exactly the same time, that's how you know it's the way you have to go. That's how you know it's the road you have to follow. That's how you know it's just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting, half a step into self-forgetting, and the rest restored by what you'll meet. There's a road always beckoning. When you see the two sides of it closing together at that far horizon and deep in your own heart at exactly the same time, and deep when you see the two sides of it closing together at that far horizon and deep in your own heart at exactly the same time, that's how you know It's the way you have to go. That's how you know it's the road you'll have to follow. That's how you know it's just beyond yourself. It's where you have to go.
How many of you are familiar with David White? Okay. So if you're not, this is the first aha that I hope you will take as an invitation. David is a poet. He is an author. He wrote about poetry in corporate America. It was called Saving the Soul, Heart Arising or Heart Inspired or something. I mean, the man is brilliant. And he writes beautifully, even as a young man, about second half of life or next chapter kinds of issues. He's a deep thinker, a deep writer, and I was lucky enough, Chris and I went to see him in Monterey, California at a poetry conference, and then I went with David and a handful of people to Tuscany last year. So how nerdy is that? But to just sit and listen to a man who sees through the dark, not, the glass not dimly, but actually is able to see beyond what most of us can. And the invitation he gives in this particular piece of poetry is pretty profound. And he's talking about getting beyond yourself. Getting beyond yourself is what he calls it. It's where you need to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So there are, Carl Jung, if you've ever studied any of Jung's work, Carl Jung would say that we have two halves of life. There's the first and the second half of life. And I love this quote that he said, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego, and the second half of life is letting go of it. Right? I mean, and there's just so much stinking truth in that. And Richard Rohr, another huge hero of mine, says that the first half of life is a time of necessary self-centeredness. When we're focused out here, right? We're focused on the world. We're building life's container. That's how he calls the first half of life. It's got identity, achievement, acquisition, upward mobility. All of those things are super important. And then we talk about, and I'm just showing you in a visual because we're going to make a switch into what the invitation is. But here we're talking about, let's go back. Okay. My husband, Chris, is moving the slides for me, even though I'm hitting this. My screen was pea green when I showed up today, and I know we said there were leprechauns in the computer. So bear with us if he's like in another room over there. But the idea here is that the persona is a mask, right? We learn young, and we're going to talk about this, but we learn how are we going to show up in the world, and what is a safe way for us to show up in the world. And so the persona gets developed, and then we have all this identity stuff, and we've got demands with work, and demands with our family, demands with our spouse, and that's what we do for a lot of years. Now, for some of us, we stay there. We stay in that first half of life, because really the second half of life is only an invitation. The first half of life, you can stay mired in all that stuff and take your last breath, and that's your life. Now, some of us get kind of angsty. We get this sort of existential angst that says, why the heck am I here? And the clock is ticking. And, oh, by the way, is this all there is? There was a great article in the New York Times just yesterday about millennials asking this question at 40 years old, which they call middle age, by the way. 40 years old, hello. So, but for some of us, we get that. And so the question is, what do we do with that if we're feeling it? So the second half of life is an invitation to spiritual maturity, And David White said in another book, to admit that you are bereft, to admit that there's something missing, that there's a hole in your life, is a raw invitation to yourself that you are not living the life that you want to live. That's the invitation. So each of us get this invitation, and that invitation has two sides to it. One is, we talked about how relationships are a huge part of that first half of life, but they tend to take the back seat, don't they? The work demands, the demands in other relationships kind of eat away at our time, and so relationships kind of get pushed to the side. So this is a time for transforming relationships, a time for healing relationships, a time for meeting people where they are. And the second is discerning our true calling. So we talked about persona, we talked about jobs. Jobs are jobs, callings are callings. If we're lucky enough, your job is a calling. But not everybody gets that. And so the idea here is, what am I here to do? And if my clock is ticking, and everybody's is, regardless of your age, what am I here to do today, tomorrow, and next week, right? So, and the second half of life, and I love this, Jung talks about that this second half of life is the time of stripping the mask, stepping into the authentic self, and he calls this an invitation to our great work. He calls this the time of genius, of genius. Now, sometimes we think, well, retirement, that's a cushy thing. We're just gonna, put our feet up and relax. Hey guys, no, this is the time of the great work. This is the time of the genius. And so that's what we want to talk about here. Now, we just looked at that pyramid earlier. This pyramid is saying, no, now we're not out there, we're in here. What matters? My relationship with my parents, if you're lucky enough to have them, my siblings, my children, myself. That's an important relationship with you, right? So this is the time that Richard Rohr says, if we use the first half of life on building the container, this is the one where we build the meaning and put it into the container. He has a great book, Richard Rohr, called Falling Upward, The Two Halves of Life, and it is a stiff read. I mean, it's like having a whiskey at 9 in the morning, because it's like boosh, but it really is good, and it's about this kind of work. Hello, there we go. So, Chris, so how do we enter into the second half of life? And this is going to sound kind of new agey, but I assure you it is not. This is ancient wisdom, and it's know thyself. And when we're spending all our time in the first half of life, there's no time for that. We're building personas, we're putting points on the board, we're making money, we're raising kids, and we don't have time to know ourselves. Just look at the thought leaders of ancient times and what they've said. My favorite is Psalm 77. I commune with myself to discover the measureless capacities of my spirit. I think that's so beautiful. You go all the way down. Buddha, great in battle, is the one who conquers themselves. And then we have, you understand everything when you know yourself. This actually comes out of the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas. But the one that I think is most challenging is the last one. The most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. So this is heavy lifting, right? This is not first of half of life work, because we're not ready for it. This is heavy lifting. I'm going to change this. Now, the first key to knowing thyself. If there is one slide from this whole presentation I hope you will remember, it's this one. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I'm going to say that one again. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. There is so much that is shoved way down in our unconscious that drives all kinds of mischief in our life. All kinds of mischief in our relationships, with ourselves, with other people. And part of the work, a huge part of the work, is uncovering that and coming to grips with it and healing that. And the second one lies in the process of what I love this moral philosopher from Ireland. Her name is Iris Murdoch. I love how she named this. She called it unselfing. Getting our fat, relentless ego out of the way. Hard work. But I love how she just got right into it. It's unselfing. Just unbinding yourself to all these stories and in some case, not true stories that we tell ourselves. Okay. So how do we do it? So many of you have done Enneagram work with me. Some of you may not have ever heard of it, but in all the work that I have done in the 20 years that I have been in ministry and have done pastoral counseling and pastoral care, the single most powerful tool that I have come across is the Enneagram. And the Enneagram is a psycho-spiritual tool for making the unconscious conscious and for helping us get our fat, relentless ego out of the way. Just quickly, this is a scientifically validated tool. I was traveling, and this very brilliant man who owns businesses all over the world said, "Is this numerology?" He was so confused about it. I'm like, this is not numerology. It is scientifically validated. And it helps us assess our gifts, but also where we get stuck in our life. And then it maps out an individual growth plan for every single person, and it will look different than the person next to you. The other thing is it's a dynamic system, so it's kind of alive and moving, and it's designed for independent personal growth and lifelong learning. This stuff is not something that we nail. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'll do it another 20 if God gives me that. I mean, this work is forever. And it's a tool that doesn't require a therapist or a counselor in the long term. You know how like you go to see a therapist and you're like, okay, and then 3 years later you're like, okay. But this is a tool that you can take and work on yourself. And that makes it really pretty powerful. So how does the Enneagram work? All right, so the Enneagram would say that we have something called essence. And our essence is that spark of the holy, if you are spiritual. If you're not spiritual, Aristotle called it entelechy. Anybody know the word entelechy? Yeah, I had not heard of it. You know I love words. Entelechy is the seed that something is going to grow into. Okay? The acorn has the dream of a tree. The caterpillar has the dream of the butterfly. We have entelechy in us. We have a seed that if we activate it, that's where it's different than the butterfly and the tree. We have to do something to activate that. But the essence is that part of ourselves that's way down here. It's our reason for being here. Now, then we have temperament, right? So we come into the world, and if any of you have had children, you'll know what I mean. They come into the world, they come into that delivery room, and some are game on. And some are just like, just happy to be here. And they really live into that, because that's a temperament, right? That's a nervous system wiring. That doesn't change. You can't change that in somebody. You don't want to change that in somebody. The third is family system. I know we got Jesse here, a family system expert. Family system is your surrounds, your environs of your family, and it operates like a system, like a solar system. And if one gets sort of out of sync, the whole thing starts to wobble. So family systems look for homeostasis, Okay, they look for stability. Now imagine you're a baby, boom, you're born into a family system in progress with all its dysfunction. Do I hear an amen? Right? I mean, like, people are getting divorced, jobs are being lost, people are fighting, and so this baby is trying to figure out, how the heck am I fitting in, thriving, surviving this mess, right? And if there's brothers and sisters and step-parents and all this, it's even more complicated. So, then there's neuroscience behind this. So imagine you're born, and this is actually, they say this is pre-language. So this would be before, I don't know, I guess babies, some start talking at what, 1.5, 2. So prior to that, we are wired, and this is actually based in B.F. Skinner on behaviorism, which is conditioning, right? So I show up in my family system, and you don't have to talk, by the way, to be assertive, right? So, I'm stamping my feet, right, and I'm giving all my, what I need and what I want. And I'm getting that, ooh, that a girl, that's my girl. That's my girl. That's the way you're not going to take any flack from anybody. Or we might get, yeah, pretty girls, they're just not loud like that. The pretty girls need to be quiet and need to, not be the center of attention. So we as children, it's brilliant, actually, in our conditioning. We as children are able to start trying things out. And so, I need to be a little toned down, and I need to be more compliant, or I need to be more assertive, or so all of this is happening, and it starts working, right? Voila! Now I'm behaving the way I'm going to get the attaboys. I'm going to get love. I'm going to feel safe. I'm going to feel like I fit in. So then what happens is it's a good thing because it becomes our gift. And each of us end up with an Enneagram type that is our greatest gift. We work on it. And it becomes why we're successful and why people like us and all these things. But the unconscious ego, remember we talked about making the unconscious conscious. The unconscious ego hijacks the coping mechanism and says, ooh, this is who I am, okay? And we begin to overuse it. We overuse that coping mechanism, and we start to play our life very small. The second half of life offers an invitation to reconnect with that piece on the last slide, that essence that we lost long ago because it wasn't being supported and nurtured and accepted within the system. Now, I must say here, this is not a blame game. And so this is perception. And perception is really important here. So if I perceive this is what it was, then my coping mechanism is based on the perception. But the perception is reality, if it's my perception. So I just want you to say, it's not about blaming our parents or our children blaming us. It's about how that family system drama was unfolding and how I perceived that I could, thrive in this. Okay, so now we are at what the Enneagram looks like. I'm going to turn this. I just did a workshop for an hour and a half at Minnetonka Country Club in January on this, and it took me an hour and a half to just even talk about these 2 slides. So I'm going to really move through this like at a breakneck speed. But the idea here is that we have 9 energies or coping mechanisms or things in our lives that we take on as our way of thriving in our family system, okay? We have all of these. It's not a question of, is one better than another? The problem that we run into is we generally will find ourselves stuck in one of them, and then all kinds of mischief happens because of that. So the work is, at the end of the day, to balance out having all of these gifts and not just one that you overuse. So, we're going to start with the 8. The 8 is the gift of the 8 is they are, oh, I lost my, hold on. Hang on. Well, I wanted to say something that I had written down, but anyway, the gift of the 8 is aliveness, it's power, it's strength, okay? The 8 is called the challenger or the protector. That's another name for them. And they learn this behavior young because they don't feel safe in their family system. And so the 8's blind spot is all that passion gets overused and they become too forceful. Then the fixation, or they call it a sin, and other authors will call it a sin. The sin there is lust. 8s require intensity. And if there isn't intensity, they will make it intense, right? The 9, completely different, right next door to the 8, the peacemaker. Easy going, everybody likes them, they want to, no conflict, I had a friend who was 9, she's like the comfort junkie, they just love to be at peace. Now their blind spot is sometimes you need conflict to move forward in a relationship or in your work or whatever. Using conflict to either cook or burn somebody like fire, well, this one is, no thank you, I can't be around conflict. That can be a blind spot because sometimes relationships need it. And the sin here is, they call it slothfulness. It's not lazy, it's slow to move. It's slow to move. 9s learn young, stay under the radar. Your voice is not required here. Okay, so there's a lot of this making the unconscious conscious. The 1 is the reformer. Okay, so that is the one who can walk in a room and see everything that needs improvement. It's a great gift because they can literally see what needs done and they have the bandwidth to make it happen. Okay, the blind spot is they can be very critical and that can fall on themselves, it can fall on other people. So, and then the sin there is resentment, because if I see everything that's wrong and it can't be made perfect, well, hell, I'm mad then, right? Because life is imperfect. So there's kind of a vicious circle here. The 2 has the gift of, they're called the helper. This is the giver. It's lovely. They care and they want to help, and we call it kind of the Mother Teresa of the Enneagram. Their blind spot is that they often don't stay in their lane. So they're kind of over here, and I could help you, and I could help you. Meanwhile, they got a stack of stuff behind them that they need to work on for themselves. And so the sin here is ironically for a helper, pride. Pride, because I need to be needed, right? So I'm the only one that can help you. You can't help yourself. So the pridefulness is you need me. The 3 is the achiever. And what are the achiever's gifts? They get her done. And they are outstanding. They're used to being the best. And they're also highly efficient. Am I right, Carla? Carla's a 3. And they are you ask a 3, I always can tell if someone's a 3 because I'll say, tell me about efficiency. And they laugh. And they'll say, well, what can I say? I mean, it's all getting it done and doing it efficiently. The blind spot for them is that feelings get frozen in order to get it done. So they stop being connected to feelings and they can kind of run people over with their agenda. The fixation is deceit because in the effort to get a lot of attaboys and be out there putting points on the board, they learn to kind of maneuver and be what you need me to be. So who am I really, right? The 4, the individualist. This is the It's also called the romantic, and this is a group whose gifts are depth and authenticity. A lot of artists and musicians fall into this pattern of behavior. Their blind spot is that they can, in an effort to be unique, they can kind of push people away and then pull them back, and push them away and pull them back. And it's a dysfunctional dance that they don't often realize they're doing. And then we move into the sin, and the sin here is envy. Because I want to be unique, I don't want to be like you, but good grief, your life looks so easy. So there's this kind of bitterness that starts to happen. The 5 is the investigator or the observer. This is a big head type. And the head type that has as its gift visionaries. They see things that often people don't see. I mean, like big picture stuff. And they have this objectivity to them, this non-reactiveness that really gives them this groundedness that people are really attracted to. The 6th one is the loyalist. So this pattern of behavior is based on loyalty and trustworthiness. We call these people the Boy Scouts of the Enneagram, right? Leave no man behind. Beautiful gift. Their blind spot, though, is that they don't trust themselves and they don't trust others, so there's constantly this sort of cynicism about life. And the sin here is that, or the fixation in a psychological viewpoint, the sin is anxiety. So oftentimes these people are like the duck paddling like heck under the water, a lot of anxiety issues. The 7, the enthusiast, is exactly that. They're positive outlook people, glass is always half full, life is a party, and they're big thinkers, big idea people, and don't like the details. Now, when you look at their blind spot is their inability to sit in pain or to sit in the negative. And the problem with that is sometimes the reality needs to be faced. And so if we don't face it, we can end up harming relationships and people not feeling like they're heard. And the fixation for the 7 is gluttony. So if the 8 was lust, which is intensity, the 7's is gluttony, which is I want a lot of things. The 8 is I want a lot of things intense. Okay? So there's a bit of a difference there. So that's a quick turn around the Enneagram, and then I'm going to kind of show you what happens when, we hit the ground running with these. But I just want to say one more thing, that these 9 types, they group in triads, and so they're called centers of intelligence. So some of us think down here, we're gut people, some people think up here, head people, and some people live here in their heart. And usually, and so the doing is the gut, the feeling is the heart, thinking is the head. And usually, we have, in our coping mechanism, we're strong in 2 of those. And one of them is kind of absent. So it's sort of how do I re-engage? So just like the Enneagram is about balancing your energies, this one is about balancing your centers of intelligence. The other thing that's interesting here is that each of these triads have a different theme, but what the types do with the theme is different. So the 8, 9, and 1, there's a theme of anger. And the 2, 3, and 4, there's a theme of shame. And the 5, 6, and 7, there's a theme of fear. Now, what we do with it and why we feel those things, very different. So the 8 is up and out with their anger. The 9s push it to the side, and the 1s stuff it. That same pattern there, the 2s are up and out with their heart and their shame, and the 3s push it to the side, and the 4s shove it inside. And the 5s are up and out with their head. They're up and out with their fear, but the 6s push it to the side. When I say push to the side, they sort of disassociate from it, don't want to deal with it. And the 7 shoves it inside. They internalize that fear. So there are many machinations that you can, start to go deeper and deeper in understanding and making the unconscious conscious. All right, so now, where does the rubber meet the road? How does I'm gonna get some water. How does this work in the real world? So I'm gonna give you some examples. I have started a business, and I work with people as a relationship consultant, and I've been doing it for about 2 years. And so some of the things that I have learned in my work, one is unresolved trauma. So I'm going to give you an example. I have a friend who is a therapist, and she was working with a couple, and the couple, they were on the verge of a divorce. It wasn't going well, and this therapist had worked with them for 3 years. And so she said, listen, I'm going to send this woman to you because we can't get any farther on this, and I don't know. I'm kind of wringing my hands. So she comes in, and we meet, and she tells me, she's done her work, she's read her stuff, I'm an 8. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, tell me about your anger. And she said, I'm not angry. I said, well, then you're not an 8, because that's what we live for as an 8, right? So we start to dig a little deeper, and she's getting frustrated with me because it's not going fast enough. And this is like in the 4th visit. So what I can tell you is that there's the spouse is looking to leave, has an online relationship. Children have severe behavioral issues. This woman works 24/7. So I said, but I think you're onto something saying you're an 8 because you could have this energy and some of this energy, but your place of stuckness may very well be the 7. So I said, tell me about your pain. She said, yeah, I don't feel any pain. And I said, wow, 4th visit. I said, I feel pain hearing your story, and you don't feel pain. And so, I let myself be fired that day, and I ended up referring her to a trauma therapist who called me 4 weeks later and said, thank you, because the trauma here was wide and deep, and that person could not access it. So doing this unconscious work and making it conscious is really important, because sometimes we don't even know what we don't know. Now she can do the work to save her marriage, potentially, to reconnect with her children, to find her life preservers. But if you're over here saying everything's good, okay. Meanwhile, Rome is burning. So that's an example of how it can quickly get you in the land for what is going on when 3 years of a therapist couldn't do it. And family system imbalance. So I worked with a family with 8 family members. And one of the things that I showed you, these different areas of intelligence, right? And what we came to, this one daughter felt very, very alienated from the rest of the family. And these are all grown kids. But said, I'm always alone, I always stand alone. And so the work that we did as a family system, what we recognized is that she lived here, and the entire rest of the family lived here. So this was a gut, angry, shame-feeling, heart-centered. So there was all this emotion and sort of guttural instinct energy. And she was a head type. And the cheese stood alone. And for the first time in that family system's existence, they could recognize what was wrong. And then, to ask, what can we do differently? And what is it you need from us? Because in a way, there was a bullying going on and nobody knew it. So again, the work has a lot of sort of family system pieces to it. Okay. Discerning calling. So I'm working with a doctor up at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he is the head of the Down syndrome clinic up there. And he's actually the top dog in the world on this. And he has a huge team. And so he hired me and said, can you help us work better? And he's a doctor, he's a geneticist, he's a professor at Harvard. So he's got this resume that doesn't stop. And so we do I do team consultation with him. So we start talking, and I said, I'm realizing, looking at his team, that he's filled with people over here. 9s and 2s. So this is big positive outlook types. So they're going to spin, oh, sure, everything's good, everything's good, everything's good. And what I came to find out is that what he learned about himself is that his call is not just doctor. His call is not just professor at Harvard. His call is advocate. That's really different, to be an advocate for people with no voice. And when he recognized that, he also recognized that because of his team's need to please him, to be positive, he wasn't getting the hard pushbacks, the hard conversations that he needed to be the best advocate for them. And so what he's learned in this work is, rather than stand up and tell everybody what he thinks and then ask everybody, what do you think? What do you think they would do? Oh, we agree exactly what you said, doctor. Well, no, now he pulls back and says, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Now that seems small, but that is not in his wheelhouse. He's a reformer. He's the perfectionist. He knows what he wants to do. He knows the roadmap. So he's standing there going, what, I don't need to waste my time with this. Yeah, you do. Because as an advocate, you need all these people who can help you do your calling better. So this is the last section, and what I want to talk about here is that it's a lifelong tool, and that each type has an individual map for growing and for getting unstuck. This next quote I had to put in because I'm going to step into what we call humiliation. Because this work can be humiliating, because we're making the unconscious conscious, okay? So Richard Rohr says, when I first learned about the Enneagram in the 1970s, it was one of the 3 great spiritual experiences of my life. I could literally feel scales falling from my eyes. If you aren't humiliated by your type, you have not found your number. And those that have done the work with me know it's true. The Enneagram uncovers the games that we find ourselves tangled in. So, I'm going to give you a quick little run around my growth plan and show you a few ahas that can be a little humiliating, because that's what this work is. It's recognizing the patterns, the defaults, the automatic behaviors that we all go to, and all of us do it. Yours is going to look totally different than mine, but what's important here is seeing this as an example of what's possible. So I was introduced to this work 20 years ago, in seminary, actually. And so the first place for growth is your designated place of stuckness, right? So this is a dynamic tool. This is, how do I grow out of the fact that my ego says, yep, I'm an 8, right? That's what I am. Well, that's what your ego tells you you are, but you're more than that. You play your life very small right here, but you got all these other energies that are actually there for you and are sometimes more appropriate than the behavior that you have perfected. And so, within your number, there are levels of health. So we say, the healthy 8, the average 8, the unhealthy 8, okay? And then every number has a wake-up call. That's that little bell that goes off in your head. For each number, it's different, but it would say, boop, boop, pull up, you're going down. You're going into those places of overusing a negative behavior. So, for me, my healthy 8 is when I'm full of life, and when I am generously sharing my leadership and all of those things, okay? That's a healthy 8. Now, the average one is the boss, okay? And where the wake-up call happens, because there's a lot of leadership qualities in the 8 that they learn that they have to have, and what happens is the wake-up call says, I'm a hammer, and everything's a nail, so I'm gonna hammer harder. Okay, and that's the behavior that an 8 will do. And when they feel that, because they're being stilted, and that makes them crazy. And so the average is that kind of bossiness. And then when they get to unhealthy, it's downright aggressive. Okay, so you've got these levels within your own type that need to be paid attention to and be mindful of. Then we move into your next growth area. So for me as an 8, and for all of the numbers, it's the numbers on either side of you. And so for me, it's the 7 and the 9, the enthusiast and the peacemaker. Now here's where it gets interesting, because when you take an online inventory, it will show you where your energies are strongest and where you're weak. And so your idea is to balance these. Well, this has to be balanced as well. So if you think of a plane, flying with 2 wings, I'm an 8. So I'm that protector, challenger 8. And then I've got these 2 wings. We want even wings or the plane crashes, right? Well, when I took the test, I am heavied up, like big time heavied up, as a 7. So that means I'm an 8 with a 7 wing, okay? And that is gluttony and lust. Lust and gluttony, okay? You get the picture? So we want a lot and we want it intense. So that's you're laughing at me, but that's what I learned about myself. And ooh, who's this over here? The peacemaker. So when you are living in this kind of assertive, sort of like loving life place, and now you're asked to just sort of Buddha out, and so when I was in seminary, I had, you have to go through tons of, Lindy can tell you this, tons of tools and studies, and they look at you up, down, and sideways. And when they finished with me, they said, well, you're quite the powerboat, and you swamp small boats in your wake. So, and I'm shaking my head. And he says, so what you need to do is pull up your sail on your boat and let the wind in the room move it. I won't tell you what I said because it was not an appropriate thing to say in church. But I was not happy with hearing this. I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. And, oh, by the way, I married this. So I figured I got that covered because he's such a peacemaker. If you guys who know Chris know I'm right. So it's like, I don't have a chance at this. So this is a huge growth for me, and I will do this till I take my last breath because it's not my inclination. And there are childhood reasons why that isn't. And we don't have time for that tonight, but there are real reasons. And so until I recognize it and know that that's a place and know what the signs are when I start to move away from this invitation, because that's what it is, then I am playing too small again, right? So then we go across the Enneagram, and this is going to get a little tricky here, but every number has 5 numbers that matter. I mean, they all matter, but matter the most. So an 8 has the wings, so the 8 is 1. The wings on either side are 2 and 3. The 4th is called the soul child, and it is the number that you, and each one will have a different number that it goes across the system. It is the energy that was not allowed or supported or nurtured in your family system. Another name for this is the lost child. This is powerful medicine right here. And I work with CEOs who cry when they hear about this. The invitation, who had to stay behind? What behaviors, what gifts did you have to stomp out because it wasn't safe to do that in your family system? And so for me, as an 8, part of the reason I'm an 8 is I was raised to be independent, strong. My mother said you won't need a man, you won't need to get married, you'll be your own woman, you'll have a career, you'll work on Park Avenue, you'll be all these things. So I was in college, and I said, I think I want to be a social worker. And my mother, swear, she's been gone 30 years, but I got to tell you, that woman looked me square in the eye, cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and she said, over my dead body. That's real. And you may have a story similar to that. You may have done that to your kids. I know I have done some of that to my kids. So this is not a blame game, but it is to say, I knew that my soul child, or my essence, or my entelechy, right? That thing that Aristotle talked about. I knew it was in that giver and helper area. And it took me 45 more years to figure that out and come and work at a church, because then I felt like this is what I'm called to do, what you were introducing, the protector, right? But the protector with a heart with it. 8s learn to deaden their heart because it's not safe to have a big heart in the family system. So for me, that was an invitation back to the helper and the giver. And so for me, the discerning of my calling, now leaving ministry, and now I'm in, doing a business on helping people do exactly what I myself did, to heal relationships and to start discerning, why the heck am I here at 63? And what am I going to do with the time I have left? So that was a really important aha for me. And then the other one is there's something, and then every number has, the 5th number for me is the 5, the type 5. And so we've got the 8, the 7 and 9, which are the wings. My soul child is a 2, and then my missing piece is a 5. The 5 is the objective one. Remember, the investigator, the observer. Now, why would that be called the missing piece? Each of us have a missing piece, and the missing piece is the diametrically opposed coping mechanism to yours. It is everything you are not. So in this case, the 8 is passionate. The 8 is reactive. The 8 is intense. The 5 is solid, grounded, not passionate, objective. They are steady, and they're the place of where you go for a reasoned thought and a reasoned response. Okay, you see how different that is? And so the missing piece is, to become fully who you're capable of being, you have to integrate those qualities that are absolutely not a part of your wheelhouse, and you might even push against. I have 8 say, I have no interest in that, thank you. No interest, that's not being alive to me. And it's like, yeah, well, let's talk about your relationships and how people feel about you being that way, right? So I'll give you one last story here for me, and the story is that I was in CPE, and you guys, if you know anything about seminary, they put you into these hospital settings, and you're working and with a team, and then you help each other become your best chaplaining self. Okay, so it's a what would you call that? It's like a cohort. Thank you. It's a cohort. So in my cohort, we're doing, Enneagram was a big part of the cohort work, and we were going around and talking about how we land on each other, okay, how our energy lands with each other. And Karen next to me raises her hand, and she says, she says, Leslie always has her hand up first. She always has the right answer and never gives anybody a chance to say anything. So, of course, I'm a challenger. So I'm ready, like the fists are up. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And then I'm like, no, you wanna be a minister. So you gotta cool your jets, girlfriend. This is part of the work. So I went home and I thought about it, and I was like, all right, all right. So the next week, I said, I'm going to show up differently. So we walk in. This is God's honest truth. We walk in. I sit down. We're all together. And Sean Mai was his name. Do you remember Sean? He was my supervisor. And he was late into the meeting, and we're like 3 minutes into it, and he stops the meeting. What's going on? Nothing. Oh, well, something's going on. Did you have a fight? No. We're all looking at each other like, no, we're fine. So he starts up again. He slams his glasses down, and he says, that's it. We are not moving forward till I understand what is going on here. I was like, Leslie? Well, Karen said, so I said I was going to show up differently. And he sat there and he looked at me and he said, okay. He said, do you recognize how your energy enables other people not to show up? I hadn't, but boy, was that an aha of a lifetime. And then he turned to them and said, and where are you? You wanted space. She gave you space, and the meeting fell apart. You're not prepared because you're depending on her. So these are the kinds of things that that's a relationship changer, because once you realize it, you can't unsee it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so that's the deep work of uncovering the unconscious, making conscious that which is unconscious, getting our big, fat, relentless ego out of the way, right? And so for me, the 5 invitations, and if you're an 8, yours would be the same. Now, have very different flavors, because you might have this beautiful peacemaker wing, and it might be really heavy. And so you have this kind of energy, but it's inviting you into this kind of energy, right? Your soul child is still going to be the 2, but your story is going to be different, and what happened to that soul child will be different. And your missing piece may be different, based on where your wing is. So every single person will walk away from this work with a growth plan that is lifelong, and that is independently structured for you. Carl Jung, just in closing, says, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And I love the idea that you guys are here to think about that invitation of becoming who you truly are, and not just who you automatically got hijacked to be. That's the work. And I don't know if there's a page, but I know I think you were saying that there's a very highfalutin thing. Is there a resource page? Yes, there is. Yo, cool.
There's a table out there that will have the follow-up from Leslie on it.
Awesome. So the resource page has on it just a lot of books. There are organizations, both international and local. We're so lucky in Minnesota to have a local Enneagram chapter. They do classes, they do online classes, in-person classes at the Carondelet Center. There's the Minneapolis, or the International Enneagram Association, which does conferences all over the world. And the president of that was our very own Carla Smith for a number of years, Jim and Agnes, Mary Agnes's daughter. Good stuff. I have on there the Richard Rohr books, the David White poetry. And then I have a website now, relationshipmatters.life, and you can go on to my resource page, and you can get immediately linked, to ordering them and anything you're interested in. And then I'm going to be hosting because we were going to do it longer, but because of Easter, we only have 2 nights. So it'll be a 2-hour, 6:30 to 8:30, Living a Liberated Life book discussion with Suzanne Stipiel's The Road Between Us. She has a study guide and a textbook. We'll use that, and it's this coming Thursday and the following from 6:30 to 8:30. And where is it? In where? In the Colonnade. So I think we're going to see if people want to, is there a place to sign up if you're interested in that?
What we'll do is we'll put up on the webpage tomorrow a sign up. So that'll be easy. You've got the QR code, it'll take you right there, and I will have Marty put up a sign up for that. So you can let us know you're coming.
Yeah, the good thing, and one of the things I asked is if you go to the EnneagramInstitute.com, there is a test that you can take, an inventory called the RHETI, R-H-E-T-I, and I would encourage you to take that inventory and bring your results because they're not easy to discern on your own. Because it's going to show you where energies are, but unless you're trained, it's not always your top one where you're stuck. You can have a lot of one of the energies and it not be the one that's playing havoc in your life. Questions? Yeah.
If you're an 8 when you're young, are you an 8 for the rest of your life?
Good question. Yes. So hopefully you become a more redeemed or liberated 8. But yeah, the answer is, the question was, if you're an 8 as a child, do you always stay there? And the thinking here is that this is a coping mechanism that you develop young to survive in your system, and you get really good at it, and it becomes actually your greatest gift. So this isn't a thing about shaming, it's just you overuse it. But it doesn't go away because it did great work when you were young. It was necessary. And so this isn't, I mean, like Richard Rohr has this beautiful, in his book, Falling Up, where he calls it retiring your loyal soldiers, discharging, that's it, discharging your loyal soldiers. So when we're young, we recruit soldiers who are going to protect us. And that protection might be that I'm withdrawn and I stay quiet and I don't matter and I don't want to, or it could be that I assert myself all over the place and I'm into everybody's business. And so, right, so those worked, that was important. And then in Japan, that's what they call it, discharging your loyal soldiers. They say, once the battle is done, you thank them for their service, and you wave them on because they're no longer necessary. They're doing more harm than good. And that's the work of this. That's the work of the Enneagram, to say, okay, all that fear that you had, or all that anger that you had, and that buoyed you into becoming the person who you are. But all the negative stuff that's starting to create, discharge it, thank it. But you don't have to carry it with you the rest of your life. The beauty of it is you become a more integrated 8, and then as you do more and more of the work, these numbers, when you take that inventory, your numbers will get much more balanced. In which case, you're a healthy 8, that's the foot you step on into life with, but you have all these other beautiful energies that were never really accessible to you because your ego was so busy holding you into this little slice.
So other questions, I'll bring the mic to you.
It's a quick question about the investigator, the number 5. I don't think you mentioned what that sin or fixation was.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So the fixation or sin of the 5 is called avarice, and it's hoarding. Now, that's not the hoarding we think of, where somebody is, putting up all that stuff and they can't get through their house. This hoarding is a feeling that resources in life are too limited and that I have to hold my resources close in. And so remember, the 5 lives in the fear triad. So there's fear of there not being enough. So they can withhold emotion, they can withhold resources, they kind of build kind of an alienation around them when they're not healthy. So that's the hoarding is what they tend to do. So, and that's a wake-up call for a 5 when they start to feel themselves doing this and kind of pulling all the game pieces in. That's a wake-up call. Everyone has that call, that blind spot.
But does a person have, I think I know someone who's a 5, Does that person... But does that person have to realize it on his or her own, or is it helpful for someone to say, I think you're pulling me?
So that's an excellent question. So one thing we don't do, even when so I'm certified in this. I spent 10 years learning it because it's so beautiful in its simplicity, but it is so deep and complex. And I got to tell you, I don't even do that because I can have a sense of where you may be, but here's the key, and thank you for that, because the importance in Enneagram work is not the behavior you witness, it's the motivation under it. That's really different. So 8s and 3s can look a lot alike. We're assertive, we're get her done, we're alive and passionate about what we believe in, but the reason 3s do that is because they want to get approval from out there. And the reason 8s do it is because they need to be strong, and that's their way of showing their gravitas. So that's where it's tricky. We don't know other people's wounds. We don't know what the motivation behind. Now, what you probably know is that, and so this is gonna blow your head up, but so there's different, instead of the groupings over there, we can group the 3, the 7, and the 8 together because they are called assertive types. And so one of the ways that we start, kind of jimmying down what a type of person can be is to look at them and say, are you an assertive person? And generally, we can tell that. And so then you're probably in this group. Or the withdrawn types, right? I'm married to one and I have a son who's a withdrawn type. It's pretty obvious, they're more introverted. They hold themselves back. Well, that's the 9 and the 5 and the 4. And so you can start to kind of slice the pie in ways to get them closer. But if it's important that A, that they recognize it, and B, that you don't try to type them. Fair? Yeah. It's hard. Because we all, as you sit here, we're all wanting to type everybody in our head. And the problem is this work is all about an inside job.
Other questions? Oh.
What about people with special needs?
People who what?
With special needs.
Uh-huh.
Maybe nonverbal. Can you see them coping, and...
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think so, because there are, then you are typing somebody for them, right? But I can tell you that my son JJ is squarely right here. And he's assertive, he likes the good things in life, he doesn't want to dwell on pain. When we used to ask him if he was mad, he would go like this, which meant happy. No, I'm not mad. Meanwhile, he's screaming. And then you go, are you mad? Trying to label it for him. Happy. So there were behaviors. He loves pretty girls. He's learned that the bathroom and the hostess stand are always at the same little area, and that the hostess stand means pretty girls. And so he sits down at any restaurant and does this, and that means potty time. And that's because the pretty girls are over at the hostess stand. So, yes, I think it can, because JJ is very assertive. So that would put him into here, here, or here. Yeah, I think so, because when you are, just even saying to him, are you angry? That it's okay to be angry. And so I think, part of it is, it's going to be different how we help them grow, because cognitively they may not understand the wake-up call or those kinds of things, but recognizing where their energies are low and helping them find that. Like JJ has very little 9 in him, and so a lot of the work is to, keep things calm for him, and so I think there is an opportunity there. Anybody else?
Questions? Anyone? All right. Well, again, let me remind you that There's the resource page out there. Bart Foreman's at the table, and he'll give you that. Go to our webpage, and we'll have a sign up there tomorrow for the follow-up sessions, which I think will be, fascinating, helpful for all of us. And put on your calendar, our next two, you've got a description of those. And John Estrom, the weather whisperer, has said that he will guarantee some good weather next time. And be sure to pass on to anyone that you think would benefit from this or the other speakers that we've had to go to the website, and Leslie's will be up probably tomorrow. And so those that couldn't make it tonight can still get the benefit of that. So thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Very.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. Go out and do your genius. Find your genius, you guys. That's the call. That's the next step.
Well, lots to think about, and I think we're going to go away and do that. And hopefully we'll see a number of you next Thursday and the following Thursday. So thanks again. Drive safe going home. Hopefully the roads aren't frozen. So take it easy.